Hello, guys. Welcome back to Good Grief Life After Loss. Thank you so much for being here. I am recording this episode for the third time now because it was apparently trash day at 6 p.m. on a Monday. So, as I was in the middle of recording this, there was like a 20-minute period where they were just driving a trash truck through the back alley behind my apartment and throwing glass bottles all over the place. So, I lost my momentum and now we are starting over, which hopefully means this episode will only be better than it was going to be originally. Anyways, I'm scared something else loud and noisy is going to happen to ruin this recording session, so let's just dive right into this week's episode. Today, I want to talk about the ways that I coped after losing Sam and some of just like the weird things in general that happened. As I was doing the last month of episodes reflecting on 10 years without Sam, I talked a lot about that buildup to Sam's accident and our time in Australia and the actual day of losing Sam. But what I didn't talk to you guys about is the days, the weeks, the months that followed after losing Sam and what life looked like there. And now that it's been 10 years, I can look back on those first few months after losing Sam and I can see how everything I did, all of those random, impulsive, this does not even make sense choices I was making, were actually just me trying to cope with my new reality. But at the time, I did not think I was coping. I thought I was simply living my 14-year-old teenage self life, doing what felt normal in a world that had just completely stopped making sense and was no longer anything like it had been just a month before. I think maybe media plays a role in the fact that we expect grief to look a very certain way. We expect it to look like crying and overeating and sitting in dark and talking to a therapist and writing in a journal and removing yourself from social situations. But sometimes grief does not look like that at all. Sometimes grief looks like shopping or changing your appearance or quitting everything or starting relationships and ending friendships. Um, and just trying to find some sort of way to make a new normal for yourself. So today I want to talk about all of the weird, unexpected, and kind of chaotic ways that I coped after losing Sam, and how looking back now I can see grief was behind all of it. And I think some of these aren't necessarily coping. Some of them are just like the ways that my life changed after losing Sam that at the time I didn't realize were related to the fact that I was experiencing grief and had just lost Sam. I just thought they were normal things. I think as a teenager, especially, it's like teenagers are already hormonal and making bad decisions and doing crazy things that they had never done before. And so I think it all kind of blended together. But looking back now, I can see grief was behind so much of it. So I wanted to share all this with you because maybe your coping looked similar, or it also looked weird and strange and surprising to everyone else, and tell you guys kind of what my new reality looked like in the days, weeks, months after I lost Sam. So let's get into it. So this one I'll go over quickly, but it's honestly one of the things I remember most from this time, which is that in the months after Sam died, I suddenly was doing an ungodly amount of shopping. I had never been a big shopper before. It was never really important to me, but suddenly I had access to my dad's credit card in the months after losing Sam. And I think what this was is that my dad's love language is gift giving. He actually has a lot of love languages, but I think one of his big love languages is gift giving. He loves gift giving. He's very good at it. And I think for him at that time, it was like, I don't know how to support a teenage girl experiencing grief and also just all of the emotions of being a teenager in general. And so I think something that maybe we came to the conclusion of together that would make me happy was getting to go shopping. And so all of a sudden, in the months after losing Sam, I was given free reign and could go to Lululemon or the outlet mall or wherever I wanted to go. And it's just like a very weird little thing that I remember doing in the months after losing Sam was all of a sudden loved to go shopping, loved to spend money, and had a lot of access to it. Very weird. Something I do also want to preface with this whole episode and honestly this whole podcast in general is that when I talk about like my own personal grief journey, I think the way I remember certain things are probably so different from the way my friends, my parents, my teachers, whoever it is, remember certain things. So, like, the way I remember this memory could be completely different from the reality or from the way my parents perceive this story. So, I think that's grief in general, is we all remember these situations differently. But, anyways, I'm sure if I asked my dad about this, he would have a very different story to tell. Something else that felt very strange and out of the ordinary for me is that one week after Sam's celebration of life, my friends and I went on a camping trip. And normally, this is something my parents would have absolutely said no way to. Like, 14-year-old Skylar going camping in the woods with her friends, not happening, absolutely not. But this time, they said yes without hesitation, which is like weird to me, I think. Honestly, I think Sam and I had like stricter rules than a lot of people I knew, in the sense that like our parents were very cautious about where we were going, who was going to be there, whose parents knew, who was making sure everything was going to go well. So I honestly think this is very weird that a week after Sam's funeral, at 14 years old, I got to go camping with my friends out in the woods. But we did. We had a blast. I actually remember being there with my friends, and we saw some of Sam's friends camping at the same campground, like across the lake, which was really random. But I think for my parents, maybe at the time they were just relieved I wanted to do something, anything. And for me, it was like very freeing in that moment. Like I could step outside of what had just happened. I could leave behind all the drama and the rumors and the whispers and the hugs and tears and sad looks and just go camping with my friends and make s'mores and run around and go swimming. And it was just so fun. But I also remember thinking, like, this would have never happened. Like, my parents would have never said no to this. But I feel like they, like, couldn't say no to me in that moment after what we had gone through. Um, which I think is why a lot of things happened as a result of them feeling like they couldn't say no to me after experiencing such loss. A couple weeks after Sam died, a lot of these things happened right after the memorial. I decided to chop my extremely long hair into a little, like, shoulder length bob. I decided I needed a whole new look. I redecorated my whole room. Went to IKEA, did the whole shopping trip. And I think at the time I told myself, like, I just want change. But looking back, I think there's a piece of me that suddenly had a lot more attention than I had ever received in the past. All of a sudden, it felt like everyone knew who I was and was looking at me and cared about what I was doing, because we had had such a public loss. Like, everyone knew what had happened to Sam. And so I felt like I was trying to maybe like physically erase my old self and rebuild a new self. I don't know. It was weird, but 2 weeks after Sam passed away, I chopped it all away, and honestly, I loved it. I was pretty happy with it. I also think at that time, I felt like I had matured and aged so many years. Like, I no longer felt like a 14-year-old, I felt like a full-grown adult, and so to have that short, trendy haircut almost felt fitting for that time in my life and where I felt like I was. Um, Something that definitely screams coping mechanism to me is the fact that I started quitting everything. This was in the early months of after losing Sam, and honestly in like a year or two after losing Sam too. The biggest one is soccer. Soccer used to be my whole entire world. It was my absolute favorite thing. I did it with all of my best friends. I'd done it since I was like 3 years old. It was something I loved and cherished so much. And then I just suddenly quit it. Walked up to the coach before practice and quit for what kind of felt like no reason. I don't know. It was impulsive in a way, but also well thought out. But it was just something that, like, I think a lot of athletes, or maybe I'm just speaking for myself, have that daydream of like going up to your coach who's being a jerk and just like saying, you know what, screw it, I quit. And I had always had that daydream, but I was never going to do it. And then suddenly I lost Sam and I just no longer cared and I quit soccer, my favorite thing in the whole world. Something else I also kind of quit was school, because not even that I couldn't focus anymore, I just stopped caring. I would just leave school in the middle of the day, sometimes without even saying where I was going or knowing where I was going. And it wasn't like some big act of rebellion. I just literally did not care anymore about any of that. Things that I once loved, things that I once cared about suddenly did not matter at all anymore. I was done putting up with coaches and teachers and things that weren't fun or anyone who wanted me to try harder than I had the capacity to try. I just didn't want to try at all. I was just like simply trying to exist, and the thought of trying any more than that was so overwhelming that I'd rather just quit than have to try. I don't know. The one bright side is that somehow, out of all that quitting, I actually found something new, which was track. I started running, or sprinting, should I say, and I was just surprised how much I loved it. Maybe because it was me against me, honestly, for most of the time, or it gave me that sense of like release when everything felt trapped inside me, or a little bit of endorphins. I don't know, some serotonin. But track was one of the first things that made me feel even a little bit alive again. I found it just a few months after losing Sam, and it honestly was like my saving grace. I feel like I had lost soccer, which was such a big part of me, but I gained track. And with that, I gained new friends and coaches who cared and just something I was passionate about. And at that time in my life, it was so hard to be passionate about anything. So, that is the one maybe healthy way I coped, was finding something new. Um, Something else that I don't know if it was necessarily coping, but just adjusting to a new reality is that 2 months after losing Sam, my dad and I went on a trip to Mexico together, a father-daughter trip. Um, we had always traveled with my dad a lot growing up because he traveled for work, and so was able to take us with him, or just had the airline benefits to bring us on these really cool fun vacations. So we always went, the three of us, on a lot of really fun trips. And so December of 2015, just a few months after losing Sam, we went to Mexico. And I think this was maybe my dad's attempt of like, how do we make life feel normal again? You take a trip, you go to the beach, you do something families do. Um, and unfortunately, it just was not normal. It was so uncomfortable for both of us, actually. I think at one point, both me and my dad were texting my mom separately, being like, help, this is so awkward. What do we do? But for me, that time was just like such a stark reminder that Sam was gone, because I remember we went to this resort and had a beautiful pool, and all these kids were playing in the pool, and I was just like, I don't have anyone to play in the pool with. And I remember just like realizing it was actually like a very um intense realization of like my person who in the past would have explored this whole resort with and ran along the beaches, and we would have been digging for seashells and building sandcastles, yes, at 14. And we'd be like swimming in the pool and doing backflips underwater and all these things. Like, I no longer have that person. And honestly, it was like very depressing realization. And I think for my dad, it was uncomfortable because there had always been two of us kids to talk to. And then all of a sudden it was just me, and I didn't really want to talk, and it was just awkward. So instead, it was pretty much like a spa weekend. I remember went to this like janky nail salon outside the resort and got my nails done, like the worst manicure ever. We went to get massages and ended up getting couples massages, which was hilarious, and like just chilled in like a spa all day. It was fun, but it was just awkward, and one of those moments where it's like, wow, grief can follow you everywhere, even to paradise. And even in an attempt where we were trying so hard to mask the grief, to cover the grief, it almost found ways to make itself so much bigger and so much more painful. Something else that I talked about in one of my episodes last month is that I got a tattoo. One of those symbolic choices that made perfect sense in the moment, but probably terrified my parents. And again, I think they couldn't have said no to. Um, but I have no regrets. I still look at my tattoo and it still makes me think of Sam, and I'm still happy with it. Thankfully, my mom did have enough sense to not let me get a giant tattoo that said Hakuna Matata, um, which is for some reason what I wanted to get. So thankfully, someone had enough sense to at least make me get a somewhat sensible tattoo, but no one had enough sense to tell the 14-year-old no tattoo in general. Something else that really stands out to me as a way I coped is I watched an insane amount of TV. Like hours and hours and hours of TV. Would come home from school, lock myself in my room, watch TV for hours. And when I'd look up from my computer, it would suddenly be pitch black outside. Like, I don't know. For me, it was just such an escape and it made me happy. And I didn't want to hang out with anyone because none of my friends knew what to say and it was awkward. And I had suddenly quit my sport, so I had nothing to do. But looking back on that, I know for my parents at that time, that was probably like very distressing. Like, sure, I wasn't out there doing drugs, but I was doing literally nothing but just like rotting away in bed watching TV. Um, yeah. Another big thing that stands out to me as clearly coping is I immediately started dating someone after getting back from Australia from losing Sam, like within a week. And I just feel like this was not me, and it was, like, a very, like, move from 0 to 100 really fast, and I was, like, a mess and very much not healed, but I think for me, 1, it was an escape from everything else, but 2, like I said, all of a sudden I had all this newfound attention because it was like our whole family was in the spotlight for months at a time, and I think as a 14-year-old girl, I was really excited to all of a sudden be getting attention from guys. I don't know. I don't know. I don't love that that choice was made, and I think I can certainly relate it back to, like, coping from my grief and trying to escape from my grief, but, like, 14 is just so young to be dating anyone anyways. I don't know. Somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, I did start therapy, probably the healthiest way I decided to cope. At first, I thought it was just, like, another thing the adults wanted me to do, and I had no interest, but honestly, within, like, 2 sessions, I loved it. I literally loved going to therapy. It became one of the few places where I could just take the mask off and rant or cry or say whatever I wanted. I remember I used therapy as a place at first to talk about missing Sam, then to talk about the fact that, like, I didn't know how to talk to my parents anymore because we had all experienced this trauma, but in different ways. Then I talked about the fact that, like, all of my friends are acting weird. And then I talked about the fact that I had no desire to go to school or to do soccer or talk to anyone or do anything. And honestly, like, therapy very quickly became the highlight of my week. And it was just so great to talk to someone who didn't know any of the people I was talking about and to know that, like, I could say whatever I want and it's getting back to no one. I just absolutely loved it. I think that is probably the healthiest way I coped is going to therapy, and I am so glad I did that. And lastly, there is something that I am very proud of because I think when you hear the word coping, you think of very negative, kind of scary, intense things. For me, I think like drinking and drugs. And in Park City, that is a place where it would have been so easily accessible for me, even at 14, to get access to alcohol, to drugs. And I am very proud of the fact that I did not turn to either of those. Like, I did not come back from Australia and immediately feel the need to do any of these things to escape. Um, Somehow it never appealed to me. I don't know. I'm very, very thankful though that that is the case, like especially at 14. That would have been so unnecessary, but I could have completely seen it going that way. And so when I look back at some of the things I did, like jumping into a relationship and quitting soccer and cutting my hair and laying in bed and watching TV all day, like, okay, those aren't all great. I don't love all of those, but I am so grateful that those are the ways I chose to cope versus something that could have been potentially detrimental. So I did just have to acknowledge that of all the ways I chose to cope, I am proud of the ways I also did not choose to cope. And when I look back now at all of these things, the shopping, the quitting, the running, the haircuts, the relationship, the TV binging, like these were all ways of saying the same thing. I cannot handle this, but I am trying my best. Grief shows up in action, not just in tears. It sneaks into your choices, your distractions, your new obsessions. And back then, none of it felt connected to Sam's death, honestly, at all. Maybe to an outside observer, it was obvious, but to me, it did not. But now I see that everything I did was my grief trying to move me through it. just disguised in the form of something else. So, to my listeners, if you're listening and realizing your own coping was messier than maybe you initially thought, or it was impulsive or totally confusing, you are certainly not alone. I think most of our coping isn't healthy, but it is still coping. It's how we survive until we're ready to face the full weight of what we've lost, and that takes a long time in most cases. Maybe for you, grief looked like throwing yourself into school or a new job, or completely quitting it entirely. Maybe it looked like cutting your hair, or moving to a new city, or buying things you didn't need, or getting rid of everything you own. Whatever it was, I just wanted to acknowledge that it was your way of surviving. And sometimes survival looks like chaos before it looks like healing. And I have to remind myself that as I reflect on all of the many ways that I coped with losing my brother. So, if you want to share your own weird ways of coping, I would love to hear them. Drop them in the comments below of the episode. Leave a 5-star review, and please, please, please send this to someone who you think this episode could help. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening, and we will talk soon. Bye.